Okay. Welcome to our podcast. I'm not even sure what to call this podcast. Let's put it under your name.
Our name.
Pain2Performance.
Pain2Performance.
Pain2Performance podcast.
Episode.
Yeah, what episode is it?
Yeah, up to 5.
Something like that, yeah.
I'm just going to preface this by Tom, you need to talk loud.
Hello.
Chris, you're okay.
Good.
Steve, talk loud, and I'm okay. All right. Okay, so today we're gonna go through Steve's rehab process. It's been a bit of a long-standing thing that he's been going through, and he's been getting help from Tom and Chris with it, with help outside from physio as well. But we wanted to go through today how it started, what happened with your training beforehand, how you felt during your preps, going into Effectus and Nats, biggest turning points, getting through it after. So I guess, how did it start, man? Like, what is it? What's going on?
So, being kind of diagnosed as an insertion tear of my hamstring, only small rupture, but still there. I guess going all the way back to Effectus,
yeah, all the way back.
We're going over 12 months now.
Yeah.
That it was originally kind of there, which was the first flare up was I felt my adductor fully go in a squat.
Yeah.
That was the very first thing, and then I couldn't. My hips were just locked up all the time.
Yeah.
I'd wake up trying to sleep. I just couldn't move.
Yeah.
Both hips, I'd just try and find somewhere comfortable. Couldn't get on my side. Couldn't really sleep at all.
Like that, like real TFL-y pain?
Yeah, really, really bad.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to acknowledge pain in the first place, but that was really, really bad. And then, we went into Effectus. I tapered and I ended up fine on the platform.
Yep.
So it was, as soon as I took something away, I was fine.
Yeah.
Coming out of Effectus, all good for a little while.
Yep.
Then as soon as things started to ramp up going into what was originally planned Queensland States,
Yep.
things started to flare up again. And then I pulled out of Queensland States, also because I had to handle out Junior States, which was the same weekend.
Yeah.
But then I registered for ACT States, and things after the original Queensland States where I dialed back again, things flared up again.
Yeah.
And it was just continual. We'd get to a certain point and it was just too much. My leg would just start to ache. I wouldn't be able to squat, and then it just get too much.
It was originally a deadlift issue, wasn't it?
Originally, the run I went on when I pulled 300 kilos was when it kind of flared up.
Yeah.
The week I pulled 300, the week before that was when things got bad, and then I was like, nah, I've set myself this goal that I'm chasing this block or these last 10 weeks or something to pull 300 kilos, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And I kind of think I just made it worse by doing it, by chasing a number, but I was set on getting it.
Yep.
And then going into ACT States, I still performed great in both Effectus and ACT States. And then coming out of ACT States, I was fine again for a little while, but it never really gone away. And then going into Nationals prep, because it was a longer prep and it was something that I couldn't move the target was always the same date.
Yep.
It just got really, really bad. 2 to 3 weeks out, or 6 weeks out even, I couldn't really squat at all.
Yeah.
The whole movement had changed just from my body trying to organise itself in a way to avoid the pain.
Yep.
But I pushed through, but in hindsight I probably shouldn't have. But that's always going to be the case with me.
Happens with powerlifting. You can't change the date of the competition.
Yep.
And your end goal is to get to Malta, so
yeah,
you had to do those things.
Yeah, and I knew I had to win. I knew I could have won regardless.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I've also got other goals in mind that I'm chasing that aren't just winning that on that platform.
Yeah.
It's also being better than what I have been before.
Yeah. When it was bad, going into, I'll go into Nat's prep because that's probably when it was pretty evident that you'd lost a lot of range of motion through your hips. When you were squatting, what did you feel?
So originally just felt like I couldn't hit depth.
Yeah.
It was just too restricted. I couldn't open up. I couldn't get anywhere near depth.
Yep.
Or when I did, it was just I had no control over it.
Yeah.
I'd just lose my pelvis to hit depth. I'd just lose this connection that I create, and I'll just lose it to hit depth, and then I could come out because the weight wasn't that heavy. But then as things kind of went further and the load got heavier, I didn't have the confidence to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And then as we kind of got closer to Nats, I think it was like this would have been the last 2 to 3 weeks, it felt like my hamstring was literally just like tearing off the bone.
Yeah.
Like from 70 kilos or even the barbell onwards,
Yeah.
all the way up to a top set. It was just that feeling of just ripping.
It was interesting. It started as like what felt like an adductor tear. I guess Tom and Chris can put some insight into that. It's interesting as it was started as an adductor tear, but then it was actually like felt like your adductor went, but it was actually a hamstring problem.
Yeah, it was 12 months, so it's like there was something that was always there.
Yep.
But it just kind of just like moved around.
Yeah, right.
And then it just got too bad to be able to push through. Like that adductor thing, I don't think it was a tear when it happened, because it just felt like something just like bubbled up in my leg and then just pulled, but it didn't feel like it torn.
Yep.
And then I ended up finishing that session. I just used one leg.
Squatting 225.
Yeah, literally. I just like shifted onto one leg and just used the other one.
I think I'll just go say that sometimes in high level competition we need to do things that we wouldn't prescribe others to do.
Do what you got to do, right?
So please don't think that Steve makes his clients squat on one leg, because he doesn't.
No, not at all. That's just me as a person as well as an athlete.
Yeah.
I'll just push through it.
Steve athlete is different to Coach Steve. Okay, well, we've got a little bit of insight into what happened, and then obviously at Nationals you just felt like you had no power.
No power. I felt super G-trained on that day as well.
It would.
That's because I was doing no back down stuff for the last 3 weeks.
You went in D-training because you couldn't get to that level that you need to be able to compensate from.
Yeah, there was a zero super compensation effect. We tapered what we would normally taper, but probably a bit less.
Yep.
And used an SSB, which was just nowhere near enough load. And my body was not primed to compete.
Nah.
Not primed to lift heavy. And even like my deadlift, like I was doing minimal back down work on that as well.
Yeah. Like you can see going into Effectus that you were peaked as.
Yeah, that was the day.
That's just looked heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, you live and you learn. And as I said before, there's a date of a competition that you can't change.
Yeah,
so
when we're
you
on the
did your
timeline.
best. Yeah, you did your best going into it. You can only change what you do going into Malta now. So Tom and Chris, when you guys did your first assessment, before you even assessed Steve, what was your thoughts on the situation, or what you were going into when you're assessing?
I guess like when Chris and I were talking about it, like the biggest thing is, we know Steve being the athlete he is, we just wanted to make sure that with his rehab process, moving him back into training, we could keep him feeling like he could keep just pushing himself, like keep like weight on the bar as much as he could.
Yep.
So we didn't get any more of that detraining effect. So a lot of the exercises we prescribed, or the variations of things, we tried to keep it to a minimum.
Yep.
So that we could put more and more of the focus on just getting him to start building momentum with his training again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you wanted that to be the end goal of the first assessment, no matter what.
Yep. Yeah. So there was some biomechanical things to take into account, and things he had to work on, which we mostly prescribed with the warm-up drills, and then a couple of variations or more constraints with the accessories.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it was a big part of it as well, was just making sure that I guess like the pain was starting to come down alongside training momentum going up.
Yeah. So like from your assessment, I just talked about adductor and hamstring stuff. From your assessment, like biomechanically, dive deep into some biomechanical talk right now. What is that? What was going on?
I guess for me anyway, the initial part where Steve first felt his adductor go would have been, some form of an adductor issue, hence why he was squatting on the one leg. But as we know, I guess with the hamstrings also helping in some form of hip extension, Steve's still completing the squat sessions following that, including the one that he did the one on one leg. I can assume that he would have used the hamstrings to help extend his hip when he's squatting. So I guess having the hamstrings do more in that movement than they usually would, because he had hurt that adductor, would definitely have, I guess, overloaded them to a degree, and then just sort of had a flow-on effect in the following weeks of prep.
Yeah. So originally, you think this is your hypothesis, because we always have one when we're dealing with athletes.
Yes.
That started as an adductor issue, then the adductor just couldn't do anything?
Yep.
Is that what you think?
Yeah. So because the adductor couldn't do anything, the body will always find a way to do the job.
Yep.
Whether it be in the least efficient way or the most efficient way.
Yep.
But our body will do what it needs to do to complete what we want.
Yeah.
Right? So I guess in this case, it was the hamstrings doing the job as opposed to the adductor to help extend the hip.
Yeah, right. And in that case, for him, would doing that make it seem like he's quite falling backwards when he's squatting? Or because, like, my view was what I could see when he started squatting, that the pelvis just stayed locked.
Yeah.
Is that the hamstrings locking on, or?
Yeah, I guess, and you can tell me otherwise, Tom, but from me anyway, where the hamstrings insert at the bottom of the pelvis, having them do more work in that hip extension, they would need to orientate themselves, I guess, in more of a contracted or a shortened position for them to be able to do that job, which would then allow, I guess, or make that pelvis more tucked, hence falling backwards a little bit more,
Okay, cool. Is that right?
Yeah, well, like, I suppose like one of the big things we noticed is that, and this sort of led into why a lot of his depth started to lock up as well, is that his femur just became really, really heavily internally rotated.
Yeah.
So that was like contributing to pushing his center of mass backwards, feeling like his adductor and his hamstring would never really get a chance to like yield itself or lengthen itself under the load. And like the big thing we need to be able to hit depth is we need some form of external rotation of the femur. And so if that adductor was really locked in an internally rotated position, he was just going to be dumping his pelvis or like flexing his spine to get as much depth as he could.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense because I remember at the start when you were trying to work your way through it, or you thought that internal rotation was going to help more.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like feeding into feeling better for a little while and then nah.
And I guess that was the tricky thing, is that it does to a certain extent. It's like if we dive into it a bit more, the big thing we needed external rotation of his femur, but adduction of his pelvis.
Yeah.
So when he did adduction work, it helped a bit because it would adduct his pelvis, but at the same time his femur would come along for the ride.
Yeah.
So it would kind of make it feel better, but also kind of make it worse in the long term.
Yeah. Because then you get really healy and stuff like that with the squat.
I just kind of got caught in this vicious cycle where it was just feeling better, but feeling worse, but feeling better, but feeling worse sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Every day you'd walk into work being like, it's a good day.
Yeah.
It's a good day. It's a shit day.
I had good and bad days going for months.
Yeah.
Months on end.
Frustrating, man. Frustrating. So like when you did the actual assessment, what did you guys run through?
I suppose like usual, sort of like just a quick movement screen, both body weight and under a barbell, to see what was happening.
Yep.
And then we just took it to the table because we needed to have an isolated look and see what parts of his body were moving and what parts weren't.
Yep.
Because as he felt very locked and stiffed up like through his hips. So we just had to make sure that we could, I suppose, isolate where we needed the movement with those warm-up rehabby drills.
Yep.
And then that freed him up to then just move a little bit more comfortably under the barbell within the constraints that he had with his super high heel SSB work initially.
Yeah, so let's go through a test that you did. And for people listening at home, please don't repeat these tests. If you've got hamstring pain, they're not going to work. So for Steve, the tests that you went through, what were they? And then what range deficits did you see?
To remember back to specifically what it was, but the biggest thing we found was there was a lot of pain with hip flexion. So when we put him like in a lying down as back position or supine position on the table, and we took him through hip flexion, that would hurt quite a bit.
So like a straight leg raise, or
both straight leg raise and bent knee, just like marching the knee up.
Yeah,
both hurt quite a bit the deeper we went into, and a lot of it was accompanied with quite excessive, like butt wink or posterior tilt or lumbar flexion or whatever you want to call it. And that was probably the standout one. We had a bit of pain with internal rotation with hip flexion which makes sense with the femur being more internally rotated. And then just movements like hip extension were hard but not painful. Like,
right.
Very hard.
Yeah, they just didn't really move.
No ROM at all.
Yeah, even when I went and seen physio the first time, I couldn't get any hip extension. Like I got like off the bed like up an inch, not even an inch.
Yeah, right. And what did it feel like?
I just couldn't
do it.
It just wouldn't go anywhere. It was just locked up.
Yeah, right. So that's probably why deadlifting felt like dog shit.
Yeah.
It's all lumbar. So much meat there now.
It's got such a noodly spine.
Yeah.
So hip flexion. All right. So taking that off the table, and you said you've mentioned warm-up drills a couple of times. So I guess let's go through load management strategies with warm-up drills and prescription when you're talking about someone who is prepping for the top level competition? Because there's different types of athletes, right? And I guess you guys specialize in keeping athletes moving in their sport. So let's go talk about how you did that with the drills and how that transferred into load management.
So I guess like every athlete or every client has like a certain pain tolerance they have, and they've got like a margin they like to work within, like so they can work up to a certain amount of pain, and then anything like after that, and they won't do anything else.
Yep.
So with Steve, we know his pain tolerance is pretty high, and he wants to get like training again. So we wanted to give him the bare minimum that would make him feel a little bit better, and basically just put him into a better position to then get straight into training.
Yep.
So most of the stuff was like a little bit of like an analgesic effect just to make some of the pain drop slightly, but a lot of it revolved around just making his range of motion better so he could comfortably get to depth with something like squats.
So you focused on hip flexion range?
Yes, so the big things we focused on was trying to restore hip flexion by training the hamstring and then adding some femoral external rotation work on top of that to make sure that the adductor wasn't getting stuck, for lack of a better word, as he tried to drop into the squat.
How does, going back to what Chris said before, how does training the hamstring help hip flexion?
So I guess in the position that we had Steve doing it was quite deep in hip flexion, and the way that we were cueing it as well was trying to get as much length through the hamstrings as we could while they were contracting. So I guess if we think about the position he was in, lying on his back with his heels on a box, like a small 30 centimeter box, really close up in hip flexion, while trying to, I guess, anteriorly tilt or dump his pelvis the opposite way as to what he's used to doing. While getting those hamstrings firing, we'll try to lengthen them and give that analgesic effect so he can squat somewhat comfortably initially.
How did that go initially?
Good.
Yeah?
Good. Everything, like, I mean, if we go back to the week of Nats, I couldn't squat. I couldn't bodyweight squat, if you remember, at all. And that was when I was like, man, I need to be able to get under a fucking barbell on Friday. This isn't good.
You left it to the week off.
And I waited till then because I was like, I'm going to do everything, and then I know that this taper gives me some kind of, effect in feeling some relief because it has every time. But this was the worst. This was like, I can't fucking body weight squat.
You actually could not squat.
And I need to get under a barbell on Friday, and I need to put something relatively heavy on my back. Else, this has not been worth it whatsoever. And that's when I first went to Tom. And that was when we did those isometrics for that whole week. I did them for fucking hours a day.
Did you go home and do them for hours?
Yeah.
He took the box home.
I took the box home.
I didn't know that you took the box home.
I remember leaving and being like, how much do you want me to do this? And Tom was like, just stop until you're ready. And I messaged him, I said, if I'll do this for 5 hours if I got to do it for 5 hours to squat on Friday. Like, I don't care how long. He's like, just like half an hour. I'm like, okay.
half hour, I'll do it.
That's a lot less than I was expecting then, so it's sweet.
How did that go first?
Good. I think I barbell squatted on the Wednesday.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
We got up to 170, and it was there, but it wasn't nearly as bad. And then we got to Friday, and as soon as I started warming up, because I hadn't gone over 170 since that day. As soon as I put like 220 on my back, I was like, oh shit, like I'm just locking up again. I got someone to record my warm-ups, and I was an inch or two high, and I was like, oh, this isn't good. This hurts. And then we got to my opener, 3 reds, couldn't hit depth, and then I just hit my second. I went up anyway. Probably shouldn't have.
Anyway. Such a smart athlete.
But it was, it was easy. It moved really easy. Like I was strong enough to do it, so I went up, and then I just kept going down as deep as I could possibly go, and then I guess I just stood back up.
Yeah.
And I didn't really feel too much pain because if I could block this out and just go for it, then I was pretty fine. But that's really hard to do when you're feeling a lot of pain. In general. So that was the hardest thing. But being able to squat that day itself, I thought was really good. Because if we go back to the Monday, and I was like, I had serious doubts.
And it was only us in this room that people that saw you through that prep, and you were really struggling.
It was rough. It was rough to watch.
Yeah, it was bad. Really bad, considering I couldn't do any back down stuff. You know, people seen what I was doing on Instagram. It looks like I was having a great prep, but you seen the one single I was doing a week.
Yeah. A couple of take-home things. Don't believe everything you see on Instagram is number one. And number two, don't reach out to Tom 3 days before the competition. You're sitting right here for a whole year.
I think as an athlete myself, though, I'm always going to do everything that I can. If I feel like there's some way that I'm going to be held back in what I'm doing, then I'm not going to reach out. I'm going to wait and then move forward after. And as soon as, like, I said to Tom during the week, like, of that, I said after Friday, like, we get ready for Malta.
Yeah. I think it's really hard for people to understand, because, you know, you come into the business and the whole time that you'd been at Perth, you've been prepping, right?
Yeah.
Like, which is crazy considering how many preps these guys need to go through. So in your mind, it's like, put my weight on the bar every week. But on the other side, it's like Tom's perfecting his art of helping people put more weight on the bar. So it's hard for an athlete to see at that stage what they actually do and how they can actually keep weight on the bar for people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think now moving forward, like for you probably reach out all the time, right? And be like, let's go.
Yeah, 100%. If it gets bad, like the way that we've managed the last, I don't even know how many weeks it's been since Nats now, like maybe 10,
yeah,
8
about
to 10.
that, 8 to 10, yeah.
The way that we've managed this last 10 weeks, like I just keep feeling better each week. Like because I don't really have a pain scale. I don't know how to rate pain. I got like I've said before, like I've got tolerable and not tolerable at all. And if I say that that week of Nats is a 10, then 10. Each week has come down like one level.
Yeah, right.
So I'm in a really good spot right now.
That's good. So let's go. So you started off with lengthening the hamstrings and hip flexion. Where do you go from there?
I suppose like once he got back his ability to hit like depth in the squat, that's when we put all our focus into just making him feel like he could push and get his strength back again.
Yep.
So when we started putting more of a focus back into, you know, restoring his ability to internally rotate.
Yeah.
Because we had to put so much emphasis on just like getting him down into a comfortable hip flexion position that he wasn't really doing as much like hip extension pushing work as he once was, especially with the variations that we had to give him with his squatting, which was very high heel. The high heel stuff lets him hit depth more comfortably,
but it doesn't push.
It does shift his center of mass back a little bit, so it makes it a bit harder to really practice the pushing element.
Yeah, that's a really big thing that I've learned in the last year is putting heels on to hit depth for a lot of people isn't really wise because it just keeps pushing you backwards and it backfires on you. So restoring hip flexion is the way to go.
Yeah, and making sure someone can just keep center of mass forward. When they are in hip flexion. Like that's the only downside of heels. It's like if you do have that structural ankle block, use them, but stay forward. Don't let yourself come backwards.
Yeah, definitely. And so like I noticed with Steve's program now, restoring internal rotation, is that the hinging?
So there's a bit of hinging doing it, but it's also, there's a lot of, I guess, just almost like triple extension work where it's just a combination of starting to bring more force being created through the toe, through the quad, through the adductor, through the back, through the hip. Just a lot of extension focus work. So that's like a bit more 45 degree, a bit more GHR. There's a couple of like warm-up drills that do the same sort of thing.
Yep.
And then that's going to progress nicely with him moving back towards more of his comp style squatting and deadlifting.
Yeah, right. And with the 45, like, I'll talk about the 45 because that's used a lot by lifters, right? How do you change it based on what you need? So for Steve, you need him to push through it. What are some things that you would change, just like in cueing in general?
I suppose like there's really two sort of ultimate ways you can cue it. You can cue it as a pull or you can cue it as a push. So like with a pull, it's very more like toes up. It'll feel like hamstrings back are just like pulling the weight up versus cueing more through the toe, the quad, and making it like a triple extension, push, jump, tall movement. They're like the two ways you can probably do it.
So if someone was falling backwards in their heels on the squat, you want them to push more?
Yes.
And someone was falling forwards, you want them to pull more. Is that correct?
In short, yeah.
Got it. That's just put my brain in to play with a few of my athletes.
It's pretty interesting with, I guess, cueing the different pull and push with the back extension, purely because I guess the way that they'll feel the exercise is going to be completely different. So like Tom was saying, with the heels, you're going to get a lot more hamstring low back. but you'll also get a lot more knee flexion, I've found, with those athletes as well.
Yep.
Whereas when you are getting that triple extension, it's really important to make sure that the athlete is squeezing their quads as hard as they can, which will suck. But
It's
you'll
very
get
hard.
so much more out of it, and so much more adductor too. But it'll just help you so much
I
more.
physically couldn't do it when we first started my knee rehab. I could not squeeze my quads.
Yeah.
But now I'm all over it.
All over it.
Now it hurts.
So I guess that's like just the biggest, takeaway if you put that in a program with your athletes, Kel. Make sure that they squeeze the shit out of their quads.
Quads.
Yeah.
Listen, everybody.
Quads.
So before I talk to Steve about load management as an athlete, I want to talk to you guys about some ways that you communicate your load management strategies with people who are going to put load on the bar no matter what. So what are some ways and we have a lot of them, right? And as powerlifting coaches, I have them too, and I have ways that I communicate with these guys. I'm not going to tell them to not put load on the bar, but I'm going to explain what that means and help them to educate themselves on it. What are some types of education and language that you use when you're talking to someone for the first time or dealing with long-term issues like this?
I'll take this one first.
Yeah. I guess what I typically will do with athletes that are, needing to put load on the bar is making sure that we only, put as much as we need. So I guess we could call it the minimal effective amount that they would need to continue to progress. So like Steve was doing throughout his prep, just hitting that top set and, minimal back down work. So that way he was still getting that exposure and still building somewhat momentum and building some fatigue coming into the competition, while we're not necessarily exacerbating the issue at hand. If it's something that we can't, manage or fix right away, and it's something that we need to wait till after prep, then that would be my sort of go-to straight away. Yeah.
What about you, Tom? You got any scales that you use or anything that you use with Steve now? So Chris just went over beforehand. What about now?
Like post-nats?
Yeah, like so Steve's going to train hard, right? And he's going to put as much load on the bar. And I think one day, how many sets of deadlifts did you do one day? Not gone?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, like fucking 20 sets of deadlifts. What if he came away from those 20 sets of deadlifts and said, I just cooked my hamstring again?
Yeah.
And, some people would be like, don't do that. You know what I mean? Blah, blah. How do you deal with those situations?
I mean, at the end of the day, you can't stop someone from doing it. They're going to do it because that's how they get to first. They're going to keep putting weight on the bar. They're going to keep thrashing themselves in the gym. So I use a combination of, making sure that the rehabby style exercises are done to the best possible standard. So at least in that sense, if, he does go overboard doing 19 million sets of deadlifts and shifts all the way back on his heels again, the extension work is still driving him forward. So we kind of mitigate some of the effects of the like excessive deadlifting. But also as well, just continuing to make sure that all the accessories have that one purpose. For him, it's just continually driving forward. As much as possible, so that he could still just go kill himself on deadlifts and squats, but the accessories will just keep driving him back to where he needs to be. So it doesn't feel like he has to hold himself back too much. He can just keep focusing on putting more weight on the bar, progressing it, working it back to where it needs to be, and letting the accessories do their job. So you're managing the issue through load with accessories. That's my favorite way to do it. I try to avoid as much changing of technique as possible, and just try and make sure that my stuff that I need to do is hidden in accessories. Definitely. That's really good. Hang on, I'm just going to let the siren go past. Perks of being in the city. I think that was kind of where I was getting with that, making sure that the accessories fit the program. Everyone has the specifics for their accessories that can make them feel better or feel stronger. And it's just a matter of using our assessment to find out what that is. I guess that's a good thing of with us specifically, my accessories in my guys' programs doesn't change much ever. When I find what works, it stays. And it's working because it's pushing them into a position that they need to be in and need more of. Okay, so let's chat about athlete with you now, because you've had to change basically your whole progression with squats and deadlifts. Talk about what you did with yourself and Sean and where it's going. So we basically just we modified a lot of things to start with. So what do we start with? I'm hitting high bar squats.
which I haven't done in years.
Yep.
Which I hate,
Yeah.
but I've got to do them, and I'll do whatever it takes. I don't care.
Yep.
We still have the double heel stuff, and